Throughout history, many great civilizations have faded not through dramatic conquest, but through gradual erosion. The process is often invisible to those living through it. Small pressures accumulate, systems strain, and what once seemed permanent begins to crumble. The Maya civilization of Central America offers a compelling example. Between 800 and 900 C, dozens of thriving cities were gradually abandoned. Researchers have spent decades piecing together why this happened. The evidence points not to a single catastrophe, but to a combination of environmental and structural pressures. Tree ring data and lake sediment analysis indicate that the Maya heartland experienced several prolonged droughts during this period. These dry spells reduced agricultural yields in a region already pushing the limits of its farmland. As populations had grown, forests were cleared for crops and construction. This deforestation likely altered local rainfall patterns, making the land less resilient to climate variation. The Maya political system relied on kings demonstrating their ability to ensure prosperity. When harvests failed repeatedly, this relationship between rulers and people became strained. Competition among city-states intensified as resources grew scarce. Rather than cooperating, neighboring cities often fought over dwindling supplies, which further weakened the entire system. Trade networks began to contract. The elaborate exchange systems that had brought obsidian, jade, and cacao across long distances depended on stability and surplus. As local conditions deteriorated, long-distance trade became difficult to sustain. Cities that had specialized in craft production or served as trade hubs found their economic foundations undermined. Archaeological evidence shows that construction of major monuments slowed and then stopped in many centers. The administrative capacity to organize large labor projects declined. Record-keeping became less consistent. The complex bureaucratic systems that had managed irrigation, tribute collection, and public works gradually lost their effectiveness. Importantly, the Maya people did not disappear. Millions of their descendants live in the region today. What ended was a particular form of political and economic organization. People migrated to areas with better water access. They adapted by returning to smaller-scale farming and local governance. The monumental cities fell silent, but communities persisted. This pattern appears across different times and places. The Western Roman Empire experienced a similar trajectory over several centuries. A combination of factors eroded its stability. Maintaining vast borders required enormous resources. As economic productivity in some regions declined, the tax base weakened. This made it harder to pay armies and maintain infrastructure. Climate research suggests that a period of favorable weather had supported Roman expansion. When conditions shifted, agricultural output became less predictable. Plague epidemics in the 2nd and 3rd centuries reduced population and disrupted trade. The administrative system, designed for growth and integration, struggled to adapt to contraction and fragmentation. The complexity of Roman governance itself became a burden. By the 4th century, the empire required a massive bureaucracy to function. Tax collection, military recruitment, and supply chains all depended on this administrative apparatus. When parts of the system failed, cascading effects weakened other components. Local elites increasingly focused on their own regions rather than supporting distant imperial authorities. Currency debasement reflected these economic strains. As the silver content of coins decreased over time, it signaled that the state could no longer maintain its fiscal credibility. Trade became more difficult when money lost stable value. People increasingly relied on barter or local production, rather than empire-wide commerce. What we call the fall of Rome was actually a long transformation. Different regions followed different paths. Some areas maintained Roman legal traditions and urban culture. Others saw these elements fade more quickly. New political entities emerged, often blending Roman and Germanic customs. The transition was gradual and varied. The Khmer Empire in Southeast Asia followed a comparable pattern. Angkor, its capital, was one of the largest pre-industrial cities in the world. The civilization depended on an elaborate water management system. Networks of reservoirs, canals, and channels supported agriculture and provided water during dry seasons. Historians suggest that this hydraulic infrastructure became increasingly difficult to maintain. Sedimentation filled reservoirs. Wooden components of the water system required constant repair. As the climate shifted toward more variable monsoon patterns in the 14th and 15th centuries, the rigid water management system proved less adaptable. The society had also grown top-heavy. Maintaining massive temple complexes and supporting a large priestly and administrative class required substantial surplus production. When environmental conditions reduced that surplus, the entire structure became unsustainable. Trade routes shifted as maritime commerce grew more important, bypassing the inland capital. Evidence indicates a gradual depopulation of Angkor. People moved to areas where smaller-scale water management was more practical. The great temples were not destroyed but slowly reclaimed by forest. The political center relocated, but the culture continued in different forms. These examples reveal common themes in civilizational decline. Environmental pressures interact with social and economic structures. Systems optimized for specific conditions struggle when those conditions change. Complexity that once provided advantages can become a liability when flexibility is needed. Institutions designed during periods of growth often cannot adapt to contraction. Trade networks that span vast distances are vulnerable to disruption. When trust in central authority erodes, cooperation becomes more difficult. Local interests take precedence over collective coordination. Archaeological and historical records show that decline is rarely sudden. More often, it unfolds over generations. People make small adjustments, hoping to preserve what they value. But incremental changes accumulate. What begins as manageable stress becomes structural transformation. Understanding these patterns matters because they reveal how civilizations actually function. The grand narratives of rise and fall obscure the complex processes underneath. Real societies are networks of relationships, resource flows, and shared expectations. When these networks fray, change follows. The lesson is not that collapse is inevitable. Rather, it is that adaptability matters more than scale or complexity. Civilizations that maintained flexibility, that could adjust their institutions and economic systems, often weathered difficult periods. Those that became rigid, that could not change course, struggled. These historical processes remind us that no system is permanent. The Maya cities, Roman provinces, and Khmer water temples all seemed stable to those who built them. Yet environmental shifts, resource constraints, and institutional rigidity gradually undermined each one. The decline happened through accumulated pressures, rather than single catastrophic events, unfolding across generations as complex systems lost their capacity to adapt. What remains is not simple ruin, but evidence of how societies transform when the conditions that sustain them change.